Good day all. This is the first of my talks looking at the history of health and healthcare. Among social historians, it is widely accepted that society has evolved through three main stages: hunting and gathering society, agricultural society, and modern industrial society. Each of these three types of society has had its own approach to health and healthcare, and I shall look at each of them in turn. In this talk, I shall focus on early hunting and gathering and agricultural societies, or pre-industrial societies. As we examine health in these societies, I shall focus on four key factors: nutrition or diet, exercise or physical activity, sanitation or cleanliness, and last but not least, healthcare. First of all, some brief introductory comments on diet and exercise. Today, it is widely believed that diet and exercise are matters of individual choice. Each individual chooses what they eat and how they exercise. However, in practice, it's not that simple. Each individual's decisions about diet and exercise are influenced by the society they live in. Each individual's patterns of diet and exercise have to fit in to their society and their social position. This history will show that each type of society establishes a different typical pattern of diet and exercise. And while there are always some people who diverge from this norm, most people go along with society's typical expectations. Diet and exercise are the two factors that have the most direct impact on the physical fitness of our bodies. A particular pattern of diet and exercise will give a person a particular body type or somatotype. The most widely used typology of somatotypes is the one that was developed by William Sheldon. Sheldon argued that the ideal somatotype is the mesomorph, who is lean and muscular, and that bodies may diverge from this ideal either towards the ectomorph, who is thin, or the endomorph, who is fat. In any given society, all three somatotypes always exist. But one of these somatotypes is always the typical or predominant somatotype, the somatotype that most people have. And over the course of history, that somatotype has changed because society has changed. Each of the three types of society has its typical pattern of diet and exercise, which leads to a typical or predominant somatotype. In hunting and gathering society, it is the mesomorph. In agricultural society, it is the ectomorph. And in industrial society, it is the endomorph. So let's begin with early tribal societies. All over the world, from Africa, where humanity originated, to here in Canada, the earliest type of human society was always the hunting and gathering band or tribe. Their somatotypes could be charted on a simple bell curve. Most of the population would be lumped in the middle as mesomorphs, with just small numbers being underweight and overweight. In other words, most people were the ideal body type. This was because of their lifestyle, which gave them the healthiest pattern of diet and exercise in world history. If you want to live a healthy lifestyle, then eat and exercise like a hunter-gatherer. Why? One word: evolution. The human body is the product of millions of years of evolution. Archaeologists tell us that our earliest hominid ancestors distinguished themselves from apes by standing upright or developing bipedalism about 6 million years ago. Humanity's genus, Homo, began with Homo erectus, who first appeared about 2 million years ago. Modern humanity, or Homo sapiens, first appeared about 200,000 years ago. For all of those millions of years, our hominid and human ancestors lived by hunting and gathering. That only changed with the invention of agriculture, which was only about 11,000 years ago. So, for over 90% of human evolution, and over 99% of the human body's evolution, all of our ancestors lived by hunting and gathering. This is the lifestyle that our bodies evolved on. This is the lifestyle that our bodies have adapted to. This is the pattern of diet and exercise that we were meant to live on. So, what is a hunting and gathering diet? First, in general terms, it's a natural diet. Nature was all that they had. Our bodies evolved eating natural foods. This means that, as a rule, the more natural a food is, the more healthy it is, and the more artificial or processed a food is, the more unhealthy it is. I shall expand on that point later on. Secondly, in nutritional terms, it's a diet high in proteins, vitamins, minerals, and fiber, and low in sugar, starch, carbohydrates, and fats. These days, any doctor or dietitian will tell you that is a healthy diet. Thirdly, in specific terms, hunter-gatherers ate what they hunted and gathered. They hunted for meat and fish, but the meat they ate was different from what we eat. They ate wild game, which is lean. We eat farm-raised beef or pork, which is high fat. They also ate a lot of fish, which is also low fat. They gathered for vegetables, but again, they were different vegetables from what we eat. They mostly ate green vegetables, which are high in vitamins. We eat a lot of root vegetables or tubers, like potatoes and yams, which are high in starch, but which were only available to hunter-gatherers in small quantities. Fruit and nuts are Mother Nature's dessert. Fruit are relatively high in sugar and nuts are relatively high in starch, and both of those are fattening. However, they were only available to hunter-gatherers when they were in season, which was only for a couple of months of the year. Year-round fruit and nuts are an invention of modern industrial society. In short, the hunting and gathering diet consists of lean meat and green vegetables for your main course, with fruit and nuts for dessert and snacks. This is still the healthiest diet in the world. C.J. Hunt has called it, quote, the perfect human diet. While the main determinant of body weight is diet, the main determinant of the body's overall fitness is exercise. So, what type of exercise did hunter-gatherers have? Well, first of all, their society was nomadic. This means that they didn't have permanent settlements. Instead, they lived in tents, most commonly called teepees here in Canada. These tents would be periodically folded up and moved to follow the food supply. Here on the plains, native bands followed the buffalo. More generally, the changing seasons would make different types of food available in different places. Of course, they had no cars or trucks or even domesticated animals like horses. So, first and foremost, being nomadic meant doing a lot of walking. The human body evolved doing a lot of walking, which is why I would argue that, just as with the hunting and gathering diet, to this day, for the average person, walking is the best exercise. The logical extension of walking is, of course, running. Hunting often involved tracking animals over long distances, which meant a lot of running. And if, while you were out hunting, something else started hunting you, then suddenly you'd be running even faster. Biologists have recently established that the one thing that humans can physically do better than any other animal is long-distance running. There are plenty of animals that are faster than humans in the sprint. Indeed, most four-legged animals are. But only hunter-gatherers could literally run all day long with just brief breaks for food and water and get up the next day and do it again. That is the kind of shape that the human body is supposed to be in, but that so few are these days. In the Olympics, at the long-distance running events, the marathon, 10,000 meters and 5,000 meters, you regularly see these tall, muscular, white Western runners lined up next to some little African runners who are about a foot shorter and look like they'd blow away in a stiff breeze. And yet, at the end of the race, it's the runners from places like Kenya and Ethiopia taking home the medals. How is this possible? Because running is part of their national tradition. Ethiopia is the birthplace of humanity. People have been running long distances there for over 200,000 years. I think they got good at it. After walking and running, hunter-gatherers' other main form of exercise was swimming. Where hunting involves a lot of running, fishing involves a lot of swimming. If you lived on the prairies, you'd do more running. If you lived on the coast or by a river, you'd do more swimming. Walking, running, and swimming are all primarily lower body exercises, which means they are whole body exercises, since you can't exercise your lower body without also exercising your upper body. This means that they are exercises which improve the fitness of your whole body. Upper body exercises, such as pumping iron, do not exercise the lower body. Hunter-gatherers did not do those kinds of exercises. They had no need for bulging biceps. Their bodies were muscular but lean. Today's bodybuilders and weightlifters may have great upper body strength, but they have an extremely unnatural body type that requires a huge amount of protein and that cannot be maintained for more than a few years. In short, walking, running, and swimming are the exercises that our bodies evolved on, and so they are still the best exercises for our bodies. Moreover, to conclude on exercise, about 30,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers also invented what remains the best exercise aid in the world to this day. Indeed, some people, like me, would say that it is quite literally humanity's best invention ever. What am I talking about? Get a dog. Dogs did not evolve naturally. Humans bred dogs into existence from wolves, originally to help with hunting. Later, of course, for many other uses as guard dogs, guide dogs, sheep dogs, and so on. But even the family pet is a better exercise aid than the most expensive machinery in the world. Why? Because fancy machinery usually gets used for about 2 weeks. Then it gets put in a corner to gather dust. But a dog will not just sit in a corner and gather dust. A dog will look at you and whine at you and generally guilt trip you into taking it for a walk. And walking is still the best exercise. To stay healthy, a dog should be walked for about half an hour a day, which, by an odd coincidence, is the same as a human being. Studies show that dog owners get almost an hour of extra physical activity per week more than non-dog owners. I find it remarkable that people will not go for a walk for their own health, but they'll go for the dog. I've always thought that says something profound about people, but I've never been able to figure out what it is. What we do know is that getting a dog improves both physical and emotional health. Dog owners are happier and have a reduced risk of death from a number of ailments. So dog owners live longer than non-dog owners. A recent study by the American Heart Association found that dog ownership reduced all-cause mortality by 24% and reduced the risk of death from heart attack or stroke by 31%. So, if you want to get healthy, get a dog. Next, we shall briefly examine sanitation or cleanliness in tribal society. Firstly, on an individual level, if you don't stay clean, then pretty soon you'll start to stink, which other people find offensive. In tribal society, offending other tribe members in any way was the worst thing that you could do. And of course, anywhere that people lived, there had to be fresh water, so people bathed in rivers or washed to stay clean. But also on a social level, every society has to dispose of its waste. Human excrement would both spread disease and attract predators. So, latrines were dug and then filled in to cover up the waste. Bands were small, normally just 30 to 50 adults plus children, and they were nomadic, so they never stayed in one place for more than a few months. This meant that the amount of waste they left behind was relatively small and did not harm either the natural environment or human health. To summarize the talk so far then, tribal societies had excellent nutrition, exercise, and sanitation. The result of this should have been that they had excellent health, and they did. In particular, disease was virtually unknown. Most infectious diseases need large populations of human hosts to get established. A tribe of just a few dozen people was not large enough. Now, tribes did meet with other tribes occasionally for trade or very rarely war, but these meetings were brief and infrequent, giving little opportunity to spread disease. Today, we're in the opposite situation. Our constant expansion of trade and travel has created a global village in which one disease, like COVID, can swiftly spread around the whole world, infecting most of the human race. But when Europeans first contacted the hunting and gathering tribes of North America, they sent back report after report commenting on the excellent health and lack of disease among the indigenous peoples. Over time, a myth has grown up that tribal peoples had poor health, which culminated in notoriously short lifespans. However, these short lifespans are largely a statistical construct. Tribal societies had very high rates of infant mortality because infants are physically weak and they had no means of caring for them. Today, thanks to modern medical technology, in Western societies, only a handful of infants per 1,000 births die. But in tribal societies, about 1 in 3 were either stillborn or died in infancy. When 1 in 3 die at such a young age, it drags down the average lifespan considerably. However, those who survived infancy went on to have lifespans similar to those of modern societies, and lives that were usually far freer from disease. I shall conclude my look at tribal society by examining its healthcare. But in order to do so, I need to begin by saying a few words about its social structure. A band was essentially one big family. It was a society of equality. There were no rich because there were virtually no possessions, and there were no poor because everything was shared. If a major decision had to be made, the whole band would sit down around the campfire and make the decision communally. Women would have just as much say as men, so these were societies of gender equality. However, from the very beginnings of humanity, every known society has had a gender division of labor, meaning a separation between men's jobs and women's jobs. In tribal society, this gender division of labor did not lead to gender inequality because men's and women's jobs were seen as equally important and necessary for the survival of the band. Primarily, men did hunting and warfare, or defense, while women did gathering and childcare, including cooking. Men did animals, women did plants. Men provided meat, women provided vegetables. And you need both for a healthy, balanced diet. These divisions were not absolute. Strong women might join the men, and old men might join the women, but those were exceptions. What about healthcare? Well, healthcare was women's work. This is because healthcare was an extension of women's 2 basic jobs. Firstly, childcare, by definition, involves healthcare, so it would be women who would pick up caring skills and knowledge. Moreover, child care begins with childbirth. And in childbirth, pregnant women would be helped by older women who had given birth themselves. Men were normally told to go away and come back when it was all over. So it was women who gained early knowledge of human biology. Secondly, women did not just gather fruits and vegetables, they also gathered plants and herbs. And so it was women who discovered that herbs did not just make food taste better, they also had medicinal properties. Women developed techniques or recipes for turning herbs into herbal medicine, just as they developed recipes for cooking with herbs. Prior to the coming of the Europeans, Canada's indigenous peoples extracted medicines from over 500 different plants and herbs. And up to the 20th century, herbal medicine was the only kind of medicine there was. Now, to be clear, herbal medicine does work. People would not have used it for thousands of years if it didn't. Herbal medicine is not as strong as chemical medicine, and it doesn't work as fast as chemical medicine. But by the same token, it is safer than chemical medicine with less harmful side effects. In the band, every woman was expected to know something about making simple herbal medicines, but for more complex treatments, you went to the medicine woman. She was, in effect, the band's doctor. She devoted her life to uncovering the secrets of herbal medicine and providing health care to the band. However, she was more than just a doctor. She was also a priestess. Early tribal societies saw nature in spiritual terms. Just as every human being has a body and a mind or spirit, so they believed did everything in nature. The spirits of the winds, the water, the wolf, and so on. Ultimately, nature as a whole became personified as the supreme spirit, the deity. But not God. Oh no. Tribal societies did not worship God. They worshipped the goddess, a figure which survives to this day as Mother Nature or Mother Earth. The Supreme Spirit was seen as female because the Supreme Spirit was the creator of the universe. Since women created life by giving birth, it was only logical that the creator of all life had to be female. Similarly, it was only logical that the band member who would try to establish a special relationship with the goddess would be a woman, the medicine woman. Herbs and herbal medicines were seen as gifts of the goddess. The goddess provided these things because, like any mother, she loved her children and wanted them to be well and happy. The medicine woman could connect you to Mother Earth, and she would heal you if she could and ease your pain if she could not. So, as a spiritual leader for the band, the medicine woman provided health care for the mind and the body. Health care and spiritual or religious beliefs were closely intertwined. The underlying philosophy of this women's healthcare was based on what today we would call an ecological model. In modern industrial society, we are surrounded by machines, and so modern medicine often sees the human body as a machine to be fixed. But tribal societies had no machines. Instead, they lived close to nature. So it was obvious to them that their bodies were a part of nature, and they learned to respect the balance of nature. If they screwed up the balance of nature somehow, perhaps by over-trapping, then the band would end up going hungry. Similarly, they believed that if a person got sick, it meant that they had somehow fallen out of balance. Healing, therefore, involved bringing that person back into balance. Balance with nature, with the other people in the band, and with themselves. Herbal medicines could help to restore that balance because you were ingesting part of nature. So could changing your diet and getting more rest. But a healthy balance had to be both physical and spiritual. Only if the spirit was healthy could the body be healthy. The medicine woman was balanced by the medicine man, or shaman, originally called the witch doctor by the English. However, his role had much less to do with healthcare. He would provide spiritual leadership in the male pursuits of hunting and warfare. He would lead the young men of the tribe in rituals and ceremonies designed to strengthen their resolve and solidarity before going out to hunt or fight. He might also engage in the opposite of healthcare, namely laying a curse on the band's enemies. All of these magical rituals rest on the power of belief. If you believe that you have been blessed by the gods and that your side can't lose, then you'll fight harder and have a better chance of winning. If you believe that you've been cursed, then you may fall into depression, sicken, and even die. Magic works as long as you believe in it. For close to 200,000 years, all humans lived in hunting and gathering bands, and healthcare was in women's hands. But things changed with the rise of agricultural society. Agriculture allowed the accumulation of wealth, like storehouses of grain. So some people became rich, while others did not. And by providing more food, agriculture allowed small tribes to grow into large nations. Nations needed formalized political structures to make big decisions, and so they became nation states, some of which grew into empires, like those of Babylon, Egypt, and Rome. Once states developed armies, whoever was in charge of the army usually took over the state and the nation. Society became divided up into two main classes. The ruled class, consisting mostly of peasant farmers, and the ruling class, consisting of the rich and powerful aristocracy. Since the aristocracy ruled mostly by force of arms, and since warfare was, as always, men's work, this new ruling class was very male-dominated or patriarchal, and women's status in society fell sharply. Moreover, men did not just take over politics and economics, they also took over religion and healthcare, as we shall see shortly. But in looking at health in agricultural society, we begin once more with diet. Diet was central to the new class inequality because inequality began with inequality of diet. The aristocracy ate much better than the peasants. Meat and green vegetables became so expensive that most of the time only the aristocracy could afford them. The peasants ate only what they grew on their farms, which mostly consisted of high-starch grains, tubers, or legumes. In Asia, the staple became rice. In Europe, wheat and oats. In Latin America, maize, beans, and squash. Most of these foods did not even exist in the form we know today until agricultural society bred them into existence thousands of years ago. For example, rice. Wild rice is long, thin, and black, and so tough that you have to cook it about 3 times as long as white rice. Bananas were originally like today's plantains, not sweet, and so tough they had to be cooked to be eaten. Humanity has changed rice and bananas and many other crops in a similar direction. It's made them all softer, sweeter, and easier to cook. But in order to do so, it has made them higher in sugar and starch and lower in fiber. In other words, tastier, but more fattening and less healthy. Having invented these new crops, people then began to process them into new kinds of food, such as bread. Bread was the world's first junk food. High in starch and carbs, low in proteins and vitamins. And then, as now, this junk food was primarily for the common people, the peasants. In Europe, with the aristocracy hogging the meat, so to speak, the peasant diet consisted mostly of bread and oatmeal. This meant that the aristocracy were not only healthier than the peasants, they also grew to be bigger and stronger. Since the aristocracy ruled over the peasants primarily by force of arms, being bigger and stronger gave them a significant advantage in hand-to-hand battle and made it easier to quell any peasant revolts. Ancient legends about super-strong giants like Hercules or Goliath were based in the social reality that the average man of the aristocracy was close to a foot taller and a lot stronger than the average peasant man, who was not just short, but thin and weedy, an ectomorph. So, the aristocracy mostly maintained the hunting and gathering diet and remained mostly mesomorphs, but they only made up usually 10 to 20% of the population. The majority of the population were peasants, and they switched to the new agricultural diet, which made most of them skinny ectomorphs. This is the origin of the belief that early humans were sickly, short, and short-lived. This was not true of hunter-gatherers, and it was not true of the aristocracy, but it was true of the peasantry, and they were the majority for about 10,000 years until the coming of industrial society. Over the long term, eating a diet which is high in carbs but low in proteins and vitamins will mean that while you're not suffering from starvation, you are suffering from malnutrition. Your body is getting enough food, but it's not getting enough nutritious food. Malnutrition weakens your immune system, which means that your overall health deteriorates. You get sick more often. You don't grow as tall, and you don't live as long. However, even though the health of the average person in agricultural society deteriorated, the population continued to grow. This led to a pattern which can be seen in agricultural societies throughout history. The population keeps growing until it outstrips the food supply, and then mass malnutrition leads to plague. Plagues played a major role in ending the great empires of Egypt, Greece, and Rome. In feudal Europe, malnutrition hit its peak in the 14th century. As a result, Europe was struck by a series of killer epidemics, of which the worst was the Black Death or bubonic plague. In the mid-14th century, in the space of just a few years, over 30 million people, or close to half the population of Europe, died from diseases like the Black Death. But the bubonic plague was nothing new. It had been around for centuries. What made it suddenly so deadly in the 14th century was that society had created large numbers of people who were suffering from malnutrition and whose bodies therefore did not have the strength to fight off the disease. However, as it always is with disease, the survivors developed stronger immune systems with some antibody protection, and Europe gradually returned to relative health. The difference between health in agricultural society and health in hunting and gathering society could be seen most dramatically when the Europeans came to the Americas in the 16th century. When the Europeans first arrived, they sent back numerous reports documenting that the indigenous people were taller, stronger, healthier, and lived for about a decade longer than the short, disease-ridden European peasant settlers. But the Europeans brought their diseases with them. Diseases that would kill far more indigenous people than all the Europeans' guns and swords. Ironically, native people's very health worked against them. Since they had always had fewer diseases, their immune systems were not as highly developed as those of the Europeans. The diseases which the Europeans brought with them had gone through outbreak after outbreak over the centuries in Europe, evolving and growing stronger in the bodies of Europe's poor, sickly peasants. By the 16th century, those diseases were far more deadly than any that had evolved in the bodies of healthy hunter-gatherers in the Americas. So, when the Europeans suddenly introduced them here, the immune systems of the native peoples could not cope. By the end of the 18th century, over 90% of the native population of the Americas had died from European diseases such as smallpox, tuberculosis, influenza, and even leprosy, among others. It's been estimated that about 100 million people died in this wave of diseases, the single greatest demographic disaster in human history. Only after World War II did the indigenous population of North America begin rising again, partly due to improvements in their social situation, and partly because they had developed some immunity to these diseases. As regards exercise, in all pre-industrial societies, your work was your main form of exercise. Hunter-gatherers did a lot of walking, running, and swimming because that was what they had to do to get food. But work changed with the rise of agricultural society. Societies changed from nomadic to sedentary, meaning they established permanent settlements, and most of the population became farmers. The farming lifestyle involved much less walking, running, and swimming. Instead, it involved more upper body work, using your hands to operate some tool, a pick, a shovel, the reins of a plow, and so on. This already made it less healthy than hunter-gatherers exercise, which is primarily lower body and so whole body exercise. However, since the farmer was constantly on the move, farming was in practice still whole body exercise, and it was done out in the healthy fresh air so that people maintained their connection with nature. The main health problem with farm work was that it involved work with farm animals. Domesticating animals gave humanity a guaranteed source of both meat and energy or horsepower to draw plows. But these animals brought a whole host of diseases with them, many of which they swiftly transmitted to their farmers. To this day, there are over 50 diseases which humans share with farm animals. As for the aristocracy, they also got regular exercise, although of a very different nature. Their social position rested on their military prowess. So, all males of the aristocracy were expected to engage in training in swordsmanship and fighting in general from childhood on. In combat, your life depended on your fitness and strength, so these exercises were taken very seriously. In agricultural societies, some 70 to 80% of the population were normally farmers, with about another 10 to 20% as aristocracy. However, agricultural societies also built the first cities and created the first urban populations. Their living and working conditions were very different from those of farmers. Shopkeepers, handicrafts workers, merchants, priests, and other specialized occupations all spent more time indoors and less time getting healthy exercise. However, the biggest change made by urbanization was in sanitation. Cities brought thousands of people together for the first time. Their waste had to be disposed of. And while rich cities like Rome built sewers and elaborate plumbing systems, most cities did not. Overcrowding, inadequate shelter, and poor sanitation led to frequent outbreaks of mass diseases. These new health problems led to the rise of a new type of health care, a health care provided by men. As a case study of healthcare in agricultural society, I'm going to take a little time now to look at ancient Greece, which was in practice the dawn of Western civilization. In Greece, we gradually saw men take over the field of healthcare. This began in mythology, then transitioned into real life. The first connection between men and medicine came in the 8th century BC with the Greek god Apollo. Apollo was Greece's most popular and so most called upon god. As a result, he eventually became god of about a dozen very disparate things, including archery, art, music, knowledge, prophecy, and even sunlight. However, he became best known simply as a protector, someone that people prayed to for protection of all kinds. As such, he became known as the averter of evil. In particular, he became a protector of children and of herdsmen and their herds and shepherds and their flocks. What he was asked to protect them from above all was disease. And so he also became known as Apollo the Healer. Apollo's healing abilities were supposedly transmitted to his son Asclepius. Asclepius was a real-life person. In the Iliad, Homer refers to Asclepius as the foremost physician with the Greek army at Troy, supposedly bringing many soldiers back from the brink of death. In its origins, male medicine was military medicine. Turning herbs into herbal medicines was women's work, but sewing up soldiers' wounds was men's work. As always happened back then, Asclepius' story became exaggerated with retelling. Eventually, he could not only cure all manner of ailments with just a touch, he even brought people back from the dead. He was elevated at first to demigod status as the son of Apollo and a mortal woman. Then after his death, he was resurrected by Zeus and raised to full godhood on Olympus. There's a clear parallel between the story of Asclepius and that of the great Jewish healer, Jesus Christ. Two of Asclepius' symbols were the staff, which he used in his travels, and the snake, which symbolized healthcare because snake venom could be made into medicine. Eventually, these two were combined into the rod of Asclepius, which is a staff with a snake coiled around it. This remains a symbol of healthcare to this day. It is often confused with the caduceus, which consists of two serpents entwined around a staff with wings. In modern times, this has also been adopted as a symbol of medicine, but in ancient Greece it was the symbol of Hermes, the winged messenger of the gods. For the Greeks, the caduceus symbolized commerce. It was the rod of Asclepius that symbolized medicine. Asclepius' disciples built temples to his memory called Asclepia, which became popular in Greece in the 5th century BC. By the 2nd century BC, every city-state in Greece had one. In these so-called healing temples, Asclepius' healing practices were continued, and in practice, the Asclepia were the world's first hospitals. People came from far and wide to be treated by the temple's priests, priestesses, and even sacred animals like snakes. The Asclepia had both priests and priestesses in a relationship much like that of doctors and nurses. The men had most of the authority, while the women did most of the work. They were also the world's first medical schools, spreading the teachings of Asclepius. Their most famous student was Hippocrates, who has become known as the father of medicine, and who in the 4th century BC introduced the famous Hippocratic Oath, which in modified form is taken by physicians to this day. In this oath, physicians swore never to harm their patients or betray their trust. The line, "First, do no harm," is still the starting point of all modern healthcare. Physicians also swore never to become sexually involved with a patient, also a prohibition which stands to this day. This clause tells us that the new physicians who were taking this oath were men, because it's only when men got into healthcare that the possibility of sexual abuse of patients became an issue. The original version of the oath had physicians swear to uphold their oath, quote, by Apollo the healer, by Asclepius, by Hygeia, by Panacea, and by all the gods. Hygeia and Panacea were two of Asclepius' 5 daughters, all of whom eventually came to be considered as goddesses of various aspects of healthcare. Hygeia was the goddess of hygiene, Iaso the goddess of recuperation, Akeso the goddess of healing, Agal the goddess of good health, and Panacea the goddess of universal remedy. Asclepius' children have been collectively termed the Asclepiads, and they also included 4 sons, who are considered by some to be the first true physicians. Clearly, both Asclepius' sons and daughters carried on his healing work to good effect. However, over time, the status of both real-life women and female spirits fell in Greek society. We can tell that the status of goddesses fell relative to gods because archaeologists have found clay tablets which provide a rank ordering of the spirit world. And over time, you can see the rank of all the goddesses falling while that of male gods rises. This change in spiritual beliefs reflected the social reality that men were taking over religion. As religion grew larger and more organized, a male priesthood took over, and priestesses became secondary, a tradition which has continued with priests and nuns in the Catholic Church. Despite the religious sentiments expressed in his oath, Hippocrates' main goal in creating it was actually to separate healthcare from religion for the first time ever. When someone took the oath, they were defining themselves as a physician, not as a priest. Hippocrates believed that healthcare should not be based on religious beliefs, but on objective observation and experiment. He rejected the widely held view that disease was a punishment from the gods or had any other supernatural origin, in favor of the belief that disease came from natural causes. Ancient Greece introduced what today we call the scientific method. Greece began the process of changing the Western world from a religious worldview to a scientific worldview. Nevertheless, Hippocrates retained the ancient tribal view that health depended on balance. To be healthy, the body had to be in balance with itself, with nature, and with society. Asclepius and Hippocrates led the way in the introduction of scientific healthcare, and many other Greek physicians followed in their footsteps. However, Greek medicine and anatomy were hamstrung by that very religion from which healthcare had sprung, because Greek religion said that it was disrespectful to the spirits of the dead to dissect their cadavers. Medical researchers could only dissect animals, particularly pigs and apes, and then assume similarities with the human body. This religious prohibition was maintained by the Catholic Church and only finally challenged by people like Leonardo da Vinci in the late 15th century. Despite this limitation, Greek physicians did find out quite a bit about anatomy. In the 2nd century AD, the physician Galen brought most of this knowledge together in a book entitled On the Conduct of Anatomies. This text became the definitive anatomical text of the Western world until the 15th century. This is because, after the fall of Greece and then Rome in the 4th century AD, science and the scientific study of medicine came crashing to a halt. The Catholic Church became the most powerful organization in Europe, and healthcare was once more subsumed under religion. The healing temples of Asclepius were replaced by Christian shrines to various saints and martyrs who the people were now told to pray to for health. Each body part and illness got its own patron saint. The church decreed that health was not determined by physical matters, but by spiritual matters. If you were sick, it was a sign of sin. You had damaged your soul, and this was being reflected in your body. The road to health, therefore, was not through physicians, but through prayer and faith and virtuous living. In some monasteries, there were monks who kept herb gardens and continued the tradition of herbal medicine. But for the most part, male medicine was reduced to military medicine, which basically consisted of bandage their wounds and pray that they live. However, the decline of male medicine meant that feudal Europe witnessed a quiet resurgence in female medicine. Towns still had male physicians, but most of the population lived in small farming villages. In these villages, the common people got their health care from the same person they'd always gotten it from, the medicine woman. The medicine woman was the village's doctor, midwife, and apothecary, all rolled into one. In short, she was the only health care they had. But with the rise of Christianity, the medicine women had had to go partly underground. The Catholic Church had waged war on the old religion, Wicca, and had destroyed the old male priesthood, the Druids. Since the medicine women were also priestesses of the goddess instead of the Christian God, the church would have liked to get rid of them also. But they were simply too necessary for the life of the village and had too much public support for the church to attack them openly. So an uneasy truce was maintained between the medicine women and the Catholic Church that lasted for about 1,000 years. But everything changed in the 16th century. Europe as a whole changed. Feudalism began to give way to capitalism. Agricultural society began to change into industrial society. And that meant that religion started to give way to science. After its collapse during feudal Europe's Dark Ages, science was reborn in the Italian Renaissance of the 15th and 16th centuries. As I said, Leonardo da Vinci, among others, defied the church's ban on human dissection to produce detailed anatomical studies. Galileo defied the church and said that the earth moves round the sun, not the other way round. In Germany, Martin Luther broke away from the Catholic Church and founded his own branch of Christianity. Eventually, all of Northern Europe joined his church and called themselves Protestants, because they were protesting against the excessive wealth, power, and corruption of the Catholic Church. After 1,000 years of virtually running Europe, the authority of the Church was suddenly under attack from two sides: science and religion. So, the leaders of the Catholic Church decided that there was only one way to maintain the Church's authority. They needed to identify a terrible menace to European society which only the Church could protect them from. They needed to stir up a moral crusade which would rally the people behind the Church once more. A crusade that would re-establish the Church's leadership role in society. They needed a scapegoat that they could blame all of society's problems on and that they could then attack. So They looked to their Bibles for inspiration. And the very first thing they saw in the book of Genesis was that the Bible blamed humanity's fall from paradise on the woman, Eve, who ate the forbidden fruit. This story originally helped to support growing male domination, including that of the male priesthood, in early Hebrew society. And what worked once could work again. Women were weak, so they could be easily attacked. But not all women. This was the opportunity to attack that group of women who had been a thorn in the church's side for the last 1,000 years, the medicine women. Only the church did not call them medicine women. It called them witches, and it created the witch hunts of the Inquisition. The book of Exodus says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." And this one line was all the justification that the church needed to launch a reign of terror across Europe. The witch hunts lasted through the 16th and 17th centuries. For about 200 years, the church boosted its sagging authority by systematically torturing and executing women. Estimates vary as to just how many women were killed, but some feminist researchers have claimed that over 1 million women were burned at the stake, and that the Inquisition should be called the Women's Holocaust. The Inquisition only ended in the 18th century because Europe's Industrial Revolution took place. Industry both pulled people away from religion and towards science, and it physically pulled more and more people away from the rural areas where the church was strong and into the towns and cities where the church never had as much authority. While the church's primary target was the medicine women, the Inquisition dramatically lowered the status of women in general in European society because any woman could potentially be accused of being a witch. In practice, most of the women who were executed could not have been medicine women because there just were not that many of them. The church claimed that witches operated in covens of 13. So if they found one witch in a village, they kept going until they found 13. This was nonsense. It would be like saying that a small rural village today could afford to have 13 doctors. In reality, there was normally just one senior medicine woman, usually with several young girls as apprentices learning the trade. The church would make the number up to 13 by executing innocent peasant women, or even, although this was rare, women from some aristocratic family that had defied the church. At the very least, the Inquisition provided a threat that could be leveled at all women. The Inquisition is an example of what sociologists like Howard Becker call labeling. Authority figures pick some minority group and apply a negative label to them, claiming that they're immoral and a menace to society. These authority figures then lead a social campaign against the minority group, thereby gaining wealth and power for themselves, which is the real object of the exercise. One group rises up in society by pushing another group down. Since the Inquisition, it's been done many times. Hitler rode the slogan, "Blame the Jews," to become ruler of Germany and nearly of the whole world. More recent labeling campaigns include blaming everything on communists, socialists, drug lords, and most recently, terrorists. As a route to wealth and power, labeling still works. But for the label to stick, the church had to completely transform the public image of medicine women. Not only were they called witches, but all of their knowledge of herbal medicine was called witchcraft or black magic. The church told the people that they worshipped the devil and had sex with demons. They cast evil spells so that if your crops failed or your cow died, it was the witch's fault. They stole babies and sacrificed them to Satan. They flew through the air on broomsticks, and so on. All of this, of course, was a complete fabrication on the part of the church. They used the technique which has become known as the big lie, which consists of loudly and repeatedly proclaiming the exact opposite of the truth. The truth was that medicine women were not evil. They were healers. They did not worship the devil or any male spirit. They worshipped the goddess. They did not cast evil spells or curses. That was something men did. They didn't torture or kill people. That was something the church did. But even though the witch hunts were based on a tissue of lies which today almost nobody believes in, they were believed in long enough for nearly all of Europe's medicine women to be killed. A chain of women's health law stretching back for thousands of years was broken. The knowledge that women's medicine had accumulated was largely lost. In the most brutal fashion, the field of healthcare was swept clean, and the stage was set for the rise of a completely different kind of healthcare, a male-dominated healthcare, a healthcare system for industrial society, a healthcare system based on science, not spirituality or religion. That is what I shall look at in my next talk. For now, that concludes what I have to say about health and healthcare in early pre-industrial societies. A transcript of this talk is available if you're interested. Good day.